simply overly content in marriage. Here I am. My name is Ryan Green. Before anyone delves too deeply into this narrative, I must caution you that there's nothing groundbreaking here. After all, how often have we encountered the story of the dedicated, hardworking, middle-aged, blindly loving and somewhat foolish individual who discovers that his one true love, his life partner, his soulmate has betrayed him? For most people, this is just another one of those sad, cliché tales about someone else's misfortune. That's how I always felt, until it happened to me. I suppose I should have sensed that something was amiss. Our marriage was excessively happy. Everything was proceeding far too smoothly. My wife was always considerate, and I made every effort to return the favor. I was as faithful as an old dog and believed she was equally devoted. Naturally, we had our disagreements. Any married couple that never argues lacks occasional conflict, and together we resemble a pair devoid of passion. All married couples have their disputes. If we hadn't argued, I might have thought she was indifferent, but our arguments always concluded with some form of mutual reconciliation. One of us would lose patience. We'd debate, release our frustrations, and then reconcile. Reflecting back, it was about 6 months ago that our family life began to take a different turn. What can we say about this? It all traces back to a phone call I received in 2013. I recall it clearly. It was Friday, September 6th, shortly after 2 p.m., during the first week after Labor Day. Labor Day had gone well. We hosted the family, her brother, his wife and children, and my 2 sisters with their families. We held the usual barbecue. The women enjoyed their wine, the men downed beer, and the kids all swam in the pool. The rest of the week was the typical back-to-work routine. Barbara, that's my wife, returned to her job, and I went back to mine. Barbara was 37, stood nearly 5 feet 6 inches, and weighed around 130 pounds. With brown hair and blue eyes, she was the quintessential striking beauty who invested excessive time and money in clothing and other luxuries. She used to say her job demanded it, but the frequent dental whitening, body massages, skin treatments, and bi-monthly hair salon visits always seemed excessive to me. Barbara earned a 4-year business degree from a local college, secured a job, and advanced to become an assistant supervisor in public relations at a mid-sized consulting firm near D.C. As for me, I was 38, just under 6 feet tall, and weighed about 190 pounds. I have brown hair and brown eyes. Barbara and I met in college, fell in love, and the usual story. I'm the assistant head of accounting at a sizable corporation that specializes in lobbying for various charitable organizations. We lived in a nice house in a mid-sized city roughly 30 miles northeast of D.C. Along the way, we had 2 children. Derek, the older one, was a high school senior, and Elaine, the younger, was a junior. They both attended the same school, but Elaine wanted her own car since she had just gotten her license. I was planning to ensure she got one as well. Now on to the main issue. I finished my work week and Barbara did the same. Around 2 p.m. on Friday, I received a call from one of Barbara's assistants. I wasn't aware that one of her colleagues was retiring, and they were organizing an afternoon gathering for him at a nearby bar close to their offices. The assistant informed me about the event and insisted that I attend. I rarely attended events organized by Barbara's team, and over time she probably stopped including me in the invitations. However, this occasion was different. The retiree was Hank Chenoweth, a longtime friend. Until he had a fall a few years ago that resulted in a broken hip, we frequently went fishing together on the Potomac River. To clarify, Hank is an older gentleman. His hip injury indicated more serious health issues, leading him to reduce most physical activities. We were close friends. I had visited his home and would have attended his retirement party. The assistant mentioned that the event would be held at a venue called The Moor, with a private section reserved, and that all employees and their spouses were invited. She also noted that bringing a gift was appreciated. I realized I needed to attend. I asked if Barbara had asked her to call me, but the assistant said no. Instead, she and her colleagues felt it was necessary to inform me. Intrigued, I asked why, and she simply stated that I needed to be there. Her remark piqued my curiosity. I'm not one to be suspicious. I deeply love my wife and would do anything for her, but her not mentioning a gathering for Mr. Chenoweth was unusual. Had she forgotten? It seemed unlikely she would overlook such an event, and why would a low-level assistant feel compelled to reach out to me on her own? Something didn't seem right. I decided I had to attend. School dismissed at 2:30, and after finishing up my work and packing, I managed to send a text to my children. I messaged both, expecting only Elaine to respond, likely trying to sweet-talk her about the car and other things. I left the office and headed to the moor, which was about a 40-minute drive away given Friday traffic. On the way, I received a text from Elaine. I replied, asking if she had heard from her mother. Elaine responded that Mom had left a note saying she would be working late to finish something before the weekend, and that we would handle dinner ourselves. She mentioned she'd be home around 8. I texted Elaine again, telling her to take whatever she needed but to stay nearby in case I required her assistance. She complained about having to stay home, and I replied with the word car. She then texted that she'd remain by the phone. I thought to myself, that's my girl. Barbara's comments about dinner, combined with her supposed work obligations and the retirement event, heightened my curiosity. I knew I had to go to the moor. When I arrived at the parking lot, I expected it to be busy, especially on a Friday afternoon. My expectations were met. I had to park a bit away from the venue, giving me the opportunity to survey the area. I searched for my wife's car but couldn't find it, assuming she was indeed working late. I took out my phone and called her workplace, reaching their automated message stating the office was closed and would reopen on Monday, prompting me to leave a voicemail. As I walked toward the entrance, I mused on how things were getting more intriguing. I entered, found an employee, and asked for the location of the retirement party. He directed me to the designated room. Inside, the room was quite crowded with almost everyone from her office present. However, I didn't see Barbara anywhere. I considered that she might have arrived with someone else, but there was no sign of her. I knew several of her co-workers, so I approached them whenever possible. I inquired with each if they had seen my wife. The responses varied. Some said she couldn't attend because she had to return home, and one even mentioned that she and I had plans. Eventually, I caught up with the young woman who had called me earlier and asked if she had seen my wife. She responded that she hadn't and didn't expect her to come. I then questioned why she bothered to call me. She explained that she didn't want to get in trouble, but suggested I check if a Mr. Woodland, specifically a Mr. Matthew Matt Woodland, was present. The young woman seemed frightened. I thanked her and walked away. I tried to hide my emotions, but her comment made my stomach freeze, and a tightness settled deep inside me. A few years earlier, I had felt something similar when my son was on a middle school field trip and the bus had gone off the road. Several children were injured, and it took a while to determine who was hurt. The uncertainty was terrifying, and that's exactly how I felt now. Were they traveling together, and had they been in an accident? I steadied myself and found Hank Chenoweth. I offered him my warmest regards and promised to get him a gift. He requested a new rod and reel. I assured him I would make a note of it and vowed that we would reunite soon. He gave one of those smiles. Yeah, we will, but not here. Not in this lifetime. That's when I realized he was in serious trouble. I shook his hand firmly, held it tightly, apologized on behalf of my wife, and left. It was strange, Oddly amusing, not in a laughable way, the look Hank gave me. He knew something, and it wasn't related to his health. I needed to get home. I arrived home shortly after 7 p.m. Derek had already left, but Elaine was still there. I asked her, "Have you heard anything from your mom?" Elaine was busy with her cell phone. She looked up briefly and said, "Huh." I repeated my question, "Have you heard from your mother?" She replied without fully looking up, "No, not since before. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the latest technology. I could send texts and had GPS systems in our cars. I was fairly comfortable with computers, but the nuances of texting were still a bit beyond me. It suddenly hit me that I needed to update my skills. I said, "Elaine, you're good with phone technology, right?" She glanced over without truly looking at me. I sensed her doubt and asked, "Why do you want to know?" "Nothing important," I responded. "Just curious if someone can access text messages from another person's phone." She paused her activity and said, "Don't you trust me?" "No," I answered. "I do trust you. I was just wondering, what if, say I wanted to see what's on someone else's phone?" "Whose phone?" she inquired. "Not yours." "Not Derek's. He doesn't do anything like that anyway." I was trying to push thoughts of Barbara aside and chuckled. "You do?" "No, of course not. I'm not foolish. I understand the potential consequences." I went back to my original question. "Could I?" "Sure, it's easy." "Do you know how?" Elaine set her phone down and said, "Who do you want to check up on?" "Mom?" I smiled. "Maybe." Elaine grinned. "Sure, I can show you. You can even have her texts downloaded to your own phone." "Elaine," I said, "I want you to show me, but you can't let your mother know." "That's sneaky, Dad." I chuckled. "I knew it. You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" "You know me, Dad. I'm your daughter, but I'll need to use Mom's phone for a few minutes, unless you have her phone details yourself." I took a seat and switched on the TV. "I'll fetch her phone for you. You can set it up tonight and show me how it works tomorrow when we're closing up the pool." "Dad?" I smiled. "If we finish the pool early, we can go check out some cars." She returned my smile. "That sounds great," she said, getting up to head to her room. But then she quickly turned back. "I love you, Dad." I grinned back. "I know, sweetheart." She began ascending the steps. I made my way to the kitchen, quickly prepared a ham sandwich, and grabbed a soda. I added some chips to a paper plate and headed to the living room to watch TV and wait for Barbara. I sat down to watch, but there was nothing on. My mind wandered to Barbara, our life together, and why she might be lying about something as trivial as a retirement party. I pondered who Matthew Woodland was and why my wife had concocted a story about working late. Was something wrong? I wasn't sure, and honestly, I didn't think I needed to find out. Whatever the issue was, I was certain there was a reasonable explanation. My thoughts drifted to the noise I'd heard the other night when Barbara turned her wheels. She probably hit something. I realized I'd need to inspect that right wheel well. Barbara arrived home shortly after 9 p.m. I watched her car pull into the driveway, heard her exit the vehicle, and come inside. Given the layout of our house, one could either go straight upstairs or turn right into the living room. Barbara entered and headed directly for the stairs. When she saw me, she sighed and said, "I'm exhausted and feel dirty. I need to wash up. I'll be downstairs in a minute." I smiled and asked, "Had a busy day?" She began climbing the stairs, paused, nodded, and responded, "Uh-huh." I inquired, "Did you finish all your work?" She took another step, stopped again, gave a faint smile, raised her hand with her fingers wiggling and said, "Down to the bone." I suggested, "Why not soak in the tub for a while, change into something comfortable, and go to bed? I have a lot to do before I come up. We can meet in the morning." She looked relieved, though I would have felt the same after her long day. She replied, "I think I'll do that." As she continued up the stairs, I heard her phone start blinking, indicating an incoming text message. It seemed like she paused for a moment, but I wasn't sure. I returned to watching TV. Around 11 p.m., I fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, I went upstairs to find Barbara asleep. Quietly, I took her phone and made my way down the hall. I knocked on Elaine's door. From inside, Elaine shouted, "Who is it?" "I'm not dressed," I whispered. "It's your dad. I have your mom's phone." Elaine opened the door and let me in. She was only wearing underwear, but since I was her father, it didn't matter. As we walked back to her computer desk, she asked, "Do you think Mom is spending money again?" I stood behind her, unable to see her face, but I could sense her concern. Barbara had accumulated some debt in the past. I reassured her, "I don't think so. I just want to keep track of things." I knew it didn't sound very convincing, but Barbara had a couple of shopping cards that some of her friends used. To my surprise, with both Barbara's phone and mine, Elaine managed everything in under a minute. She said, "Sorry, Dad, but the way I've set it up, you'll need to use my phone until you access your laptop." I didn't think much of it. "Sure, babe. See you in the morning." As I left her room, she reminded me, "Don't forget about the cars tomorrow." "I won't forget," I replied. I went to our bedroom, Barbara's and mine, changed out of my clothes, switched to boxers, and crawled into bed. Barbara was already asleep. Lying on my back with my hands behind my head, I pondered. Had Barbara been hiding something? Why hadn't she mentioned Hank's retirement? Why did she make up a work excuse? Who was Matt Woodland? Then I remembered. Sunday was rally day at our church, and she was the head of the worship committee. She was probably preparing and distributing bulletins which would explain everything. Still, I tried to recall our summer activities. Isn't that what men like me always do? Nothing came to mind. Barbara was as warm and thoughtful as ever. Our nighttime moments were just as comforting and pleasant. She hadn't become more or less critical. I hadn't felt neglected. Sure, she had worked extra late a few nights and had attended a weekend seminar in August, which was a bit unusual. My birthday was in July, and we had a small party. She'd spent a night at her mom's once. Her mother is a widow, so that was normal. She took a few days off from work occasionally to handle things around the house. I hadn't seen much progress, but that didn't mean anything. There were times I called her at work and she was unavailable, but she always had a reasonable explanation. No, there was no reason to doubt her. She was my wife, and I loved her. 18 years of marriage and 2 years before that, without a doubt. Still, who was Matt Woodland, and why had the young assistant mentioned him? I decided not to confront Barbara. She was a good mother, a great wife, a devoted daughter to her mother, and she worked hard. Asking questions would seem intrusive and tedious. I didn't want her to think I didn't trust her because I did trust her. I loved my wife and believed in her. She would never do anything to hurt our relationship. I turned over to go back to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. On Saturday morning, Elaine and I wrapped up our pool duties and headed out to browse used cars. I already had a few options in mind. We quickly drove to a Cadillac dealership, where they featured an attractive Kia on their used car lot, actually their previously owned section. Elaine and I took a look at it. The car was in good condition, equipped with a smooth 5-speed transmission, and had just over 30,000 miles on the odometer. I spoke with the salesperson, an older gentleman who was genuinely pleasant. I mentioned that my daughter and I were going to take a short break to eat, discuss our options, and return in about an hour. The kind older man informed me that the specific Kia might not be available when we came back. When I inquired why, he explained that his boss had reserved it for his daughter, and they might take it while we were away. Taking his advice, I thanked him and suggested that his boss should keep the car for his daughter since we likely wouldn't return in time. The friendly gentleman offered to hold the car for us if I made a small deposit. I appreciated the offer but declined. A few minutes later, as Elaine and I were driving to a Toyota dealership, she asked, "Why didn't you buy the Kia, Dad?" "It's probably gone now. His boss is getting it for his daughter. It must have been a great deal." I gave her a reassuring, fatherly smile and replied, "Sweetheart, that was just an older guy trying to rush us." "The car will still be there next week." He wasn't telling the truth. She questioned, "That nice old man?" "Yes," I confirmed. "That nice old man." Elaine sighed. "Gee, it's getting hard to trust anyone these days." I responded with one of my best dad smiles. "Don't worry. You'll always have your mom and me. We'll never lead you astray. Besides, I'm keeping an eye out for a Toyota." We ended up purchasing the Toyota. It had a bit more mileage and a scratch on the dashboard. The dealer offered us a small discount for the scratch, and we decided to go ahead with the purchase. I contacted my insurance agent, provided the necessary details, and he secured coverage for the car. I then walked Elaine home while she drove her new vehicle. Upon returning, we showed the car to Barb and Derek. Derek seemed a bit upset because our new car was newer than his Jeep, and he knew Elaine got a more dependable vehicle. He voiced some complaints, though not excessively. I understood his feelings since his Jeep had a roomy back area, but I never mentioned anything about it. Barb was thrilled to see the car. We had already discussed our options, and based on my comments, Barb had expressed a preference for the Toyota. She's quite perceptive. Later, Elaine borrowed my cell phone, saying she wanted to do something fun with it. She winked at me, and I suspected she was trying to access Barb's text messages. I knew I wouldn't interfere with them, but it gave Elaine something to occupy herself with. Barb had prepared a light meal of seafood salad and some curly fries. We all ate quietly. Derek had his own plans, and Elaine spent most of her time texting. Towards the end of dinner, Barb received a text and had to step away briefly. After we finished eating, I went outside to ensure the pool was properly closed. A little while later, Barb and I watched some TV together. She shared what she had been up to all day. Nothing significant, just some laundry and ironing a few things for Elaine. Elaine wanted to go out and show off her new car, so I advised her to be cautious and return before dark. She assured me she would, and she did. Around 10:30 p.m., Barb and I went to bed. The next day was Sunday, and as Methodists, the first Sunday after Labor Day is known as Rally Day. We hadn't expected the kids to attend anymore, but they showed up anyway. Barb had already prepared a casserole, and I had forgotten about any bulletins. We settled into bed and cuddled up. Barb mentioned she was feeling a bit tired. I felt disappointed but assured her I understood. After sharing a kiss, we turned over to sleep. She then received another text message, apologizing and explaining it was probably a female coworker who was having trouble with a program and might need assistance. I kissed Barb as she got up. She said she would call the girl back using the downstairs landline and help her work through the issue. I didn't think much of it. An hour later, I was still awake, and Barb hadn't returned. Was I worried? Not really. What was there to worry about? How often had people from my office called me on a Saturday night with problems? I couldn't recall even once. Similarly, Barb had rarely received such calls, especially since none of her co-workers had done anything the previous Friday afternoon except maybe drink a bit. Barb came back up a little later. I asked if the issue had been resolved. She thought it was, but she might need to check in with the young woman the next afternoon after church. I asked if she planned to call, and Barb said she would probably visit her instead. I responded with an okay. Sunday arrived and church proceeded as usual. Derek was absent. Elaine needed money to have her car washed. Around 2 p.m., Barb left to address the young woman's issue. Barb's vehicle was equipped with a GPS. I turned it on and periodically checked her location. I wasn't spying. I was merely keeping an eye on her. I knew she hadn't gone to her office. Instead, she had managed to visit a spot on Kashmir Drive. I went online, conducted a satellite search, and identified an apartment complex in that area. These global satellite services typically provide images that are several months old or older, so I didn't expect to see Barb's car or anything current. However, I did notice that the complex was quite upscale. I made a note of this on my laptop. Barb returned around 4 p.m., looking refreshed. She had showered that morning, and attending church wasn't strenuous work. Additionally, a short drive in a climate-controlled car wouldn't have made her sweat, so I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. Neither did she. I had been doing some reading. There are countless websites covering all sorts of marital issues. Maybe I had browsed a bit, but it didn't mean anything. When Barb came back, I asked her, "Did you have to go to the office?" She answered, "Yes, I had a bit of trouble getting in. The burglar alarm was activated. I know the code, so I just had to enter it all." I replied, "Really? Were you able to help the girl?" Barb chuckled lightly and said, "Some of these young people panic over everything, but I managed to calm her down." I forced a smile, though I wasn't pleased, and said, "I'm glad you were able to handle it." Barb suggested, "Me too. Do you want to go out for dinner tonight?" I wasn't in the mood to be around Barb at that moment, but I didn't express that. Instead, I said, "How about Olive Garden?" She agreed. "Sounds great. We'll wait for the kids and go together." And that's what we did. At the restaurant, Barb received a text message and wanted to step outside because Elaine and I were discussing her car. I started to get concerned. Elaine had been driving more than I was comfortable with. I told her, "Elaine, you know this car is mainly for school. I don't want you driving all over the neighborhood." I love that girl, so she responded, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll be careful." I cautioned her, "No texting or talking on the phone while you're driving." I gave Derek a stern look and added, "That applies to you too, buddy." Derek just grinned and said, "Are you going to install a GPS in Elaine's car? I think you might need it." That comment ruined my evening, but I kept my composure. I replied, "You can count on that." I smiled at Elaine and said, "We'll sort that out tomorrow when I get home from work." She smiled back, "I'm all yours, Dad." Barb returned and I asked, "Any more issues at work?" She looked concerned and said, "No, that was about Mom." I inquired, "Is she okay?" She kept her gaze on her salad and responded, "No, she's just feeling lonely." We finished our meal. I had some red wine, Barb had some as well, and the kids drank soda. We all got into my Chevrolet, Barb drove her BMW, and headed home. Later that night, after the kids were in their rooms, I tried to cuddle with my wife. She declined, saying she had a headache and was worried about her mom. I thought to myself, wow, nothing all weekend. Barb turned off her light. The last thing she said before settling into her pillow was that she thought she should take tomorrow off because she wasn't feeling well. I tried to snuggle closer, hoping to spoon a bit, but Barb moved away and apologized. I gave up, realizing that Monday was going to be a busy day for me. Isn't that old saying, Monday, Monday, can't trust that day? I woke up early and got Elaine and Derek out of bed. Before I left, Barb came downstairs and I asked her, "Are you feeling any better?" She either sighed or whined, replying, "I'll feel better. I think maybe I ate too much or the food didn't agree with me." I responded with an okay, kissed her forehead, and headed to work. My Monday morning routine was quite hectic. By the time I managed to get organized, it was almost noon. I called John Huffman's office. John and I collaborated on many projects and usually spent our lunches together. We decided to meet downstairs and go to Luigi's, a small lunch spot frequented by people like us. We arrived, placed our orders, and returned to work. I had a shrimp salad, and John chose their chef's salad. We ate and chatted about our usual trivial topics. John and I have been good friends and co-workers for a long time. In the past, Barb and I would occasionally invite him and his wife over for dinner. But a little over a year ago, things went downhill for the Huffmans. John's wife started an affair with a neighbor, left John and their children, and moved out. John struggled for quite some time. We talked about it when it happened, and his constant remark was that he never thought it could happen to him. But it did. I felt sorry for him. He didn't deserve it. He worked hard, and they had 4 kids, all slightly older than mine. She filed for divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty. We both lived in Maryland, he in Chevy Chase, and Barb and I much farther out. In Maryland, there's technically no such thing as a no-fault divorce, and the term irreconcilable differences doesn't hold much meaning. Instead, a troubled spouse can file for divorce based on adultery without needing visual or electronic proof. They just need to demonstrate the likelihood of misconduct. It's unclear what that entails. John could have accused her, but he had the kids and didn't want to disrupt things for them. He really took it well. I was relieved that I didn't face that issue. My marriage was on solid ground. John's situation was quite different. Sure, he dated occasionally and mentioned hooking up a few times, but it wasn't comparable. He said that 22 years is a long time and that it's not easy to walk away, even if you're in the right. As I mentioned, I was glad my marriage was okay. After lunch, I went back to the office and thought about John, Barb, and Matthew Woodland. Of course, I realized I was being foolish. Around 2 p.m., I took a break and decided to look up a few things. Nowadays, people across the country see Maryland as a predominantly blue state, and in many ways it is. However, in other aspects, it still retains its Old South charm, with seersucker suits, Panama hats, and big cigars. Liberals and left-leaning individuals have accomplished a lot, but not everything. Schools and public institutions are still held to strict standards. Perhaps influenced by liberal values, I discovered that most local businesses and the state government are quite strict about matters like morality. It was just a joke, a light-hearted prank, but I checked on Barb's company. Sure enough, her company's policies were widely available online. Barb's firm had very strict rules regarding intimacy, harassment, workplace bullying, and something I had never heard of before called a hostile work environment. I pondered about this guy, Matthew Woodland. Who exactly was he? What if he had been bothering my wonderful girlfriend? What if he had been forcing himself on her? Barb is a good girl, dedicated to her job. She'd be terrified to even mention something like that. Naturally, if Woodland was someone significant and had been pursuing my lovely wife, I'd need to take care of him properly. I could picture my sweet girl being too scared to stir up trouble. She might even hesitate to tell me. Of course, she'd be too afraid to say anything. She knew I'd be on that bastard's tail in no time. I reached out to her workplace and connected with an acquaintance, a guy I'd known since Barb started there. He was one of the reliable ones. I saw him at Hank's retirement party. His name was Hugh Ballantyne. I contacted Hugh's secretary, introduced myself, and explained that I needed to speak with her boss. She connected me directly. I spoke with Hugh, saying, "Hey Hugh, this is Ryan Green, Barb's husband." "Yeah, Ryan, we just talked on Friday. How was your weekend?" Hugh replied. "Good, I hope yours was too." "Yeah, mine was all right. What can I do for you?" I began. "There's a guy over there named Matthew Woodland. What can you tell me about him?" Hugh teased. "Are you secretly working for the CIA or something?" "No, I just wanted to learn a bit about him." Hugh continued. Well, let's see, he's not really notable. I think he's around 22 or 23. Fresh out of college. He's kind of a lower-level employee right now, but some of the middle management has high hopes for him. Why do you ask? I inquired. Does he have any connection to my Barb? No, Hugh answered. He's working in another department. Is there something I should be aware of? The reason I'm asking, Hugh, is that I suspect someone might be harassing my wife, and his name came up. There was a brief silence on the other end, a tense moment. I wondered if I had stumbled upon an intimacy predator. If that was the case, I'd take care of him. Finally, Hugh spoke. You know, Ryan, it seems like I've seen the two of them together occasionally. Do you want me to report this to HR? I leaned back, feeling like I had the upper hand. No, Hugh, don't bother. I can handle this. I relaxed, thinking, thank God, I've found the issue. The rest of the day went smoothly. On my way home, I stopped to buy Barb a dozen red roses and a bottle of her favorite perfume. She needed comfort, and as her husband, it was my responsibility to provide that. I arrived home at my usual time. Barb was in the kitchen, not doing anything, just sitting at the table. I looked around and saw no sign of either Elaine or Derek. Glancing back at Barb, it seemed like she had been crying. I gave her the flowers and the perfume. I sat down and asked, "What's wrong, honey?" She wouldn't look at me. She stared at the floor and said, "The kids, they've run away." I leaned back in shock. What? They left. They left a note saying they wouldn't come back until you did. Elaine wants you to call her right away. Holy shit, I thought. What's happened to them? I quickly grabbed my cell phone and dialed Elaine's number, smashing my finger against it. It rang only once before she answered. I was furious. Elaine, what's going on? You and your brother need to come home immediately. I heard Elaine crying, "Oh, Daddy!" I felt a surge of fear. You're not injured. Derek is fine. You both weren't in an accident? I winced, knowing she was too young to have her own car. She must have given her phone to Derek. His voice was high-pitched and somewhat sharp, as if he had lost his composure. Dad? Derek, what's happening? Dad, we're sorry. It was a mistake. We didn't realize. For heaven's sake, what? Didn't realize what? It was Elaine again. Daddy. I thought, damn, it was Daddy. This is really serious. What's wrong, sweetie? Daddy, just go to your laptop. Open Mom's text messages. I was stunned. Then it clicked. She had connected my laptop to Barb's cell phone, but also to her own. Wait a minute, I said. I glanced at Barb. She was quietly crying and avoided looking at me. Do you know anything about this? She whimpered. No, I just know they're both really upset about something and they're blaming me. I reconnected with Elaine. Where are you now? Daddy. I asked, where are you? We're at my girlfriend Cheryl's. Daddy, you need to check Mom's texts. My stomach twisted in knots. That bastard Woodland had not only been harassing my wife, but his actions were starting to affect my children. I told her, come home. I think I know what's wrong. Get home. I'll handle this. Elaine kept crying. No, you don't, Daddy. Come home, Elaine, and bring Derek with you. You can stay in the car if you don't want to come inside. Elaine sniffled, okay, Daddy, and then added, Daddy, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Now come home. We can fix whatever is wrong. I ended the call and turned to my wife. Has anyone been bothering you at work? Who is Matthew Woodland? I couldn't believe it. I've heard people say they've seen someone turn as white as a ghost. For a moment I thought Barb might faint. It was so quiet, like a tomb. I asked her, has he been harassing you? Barb was rigid, pale, and silent, answering so softly I could barely hear her. No. I was furious, truly angry. That bastard Woodland had been harassing my wife, messing with my family, and he had my wife so scared she wouldn't even tell me. I tried to stay calm and took a deep breath. Barb, listen to me. Last Friday I got a call. Someone told me about Henry Chenoweth's retirement. I went over to the moor. You weren't there. I called your office, but it was closed. I know you made up the story about work. Don't be afraid. There are laws about this. He's been harassing you, hasn't he? She was twisting her hands together, her eyes wide with fear. I was worried about her well-being. I spoke as calmly and quietly as I could. Tell me, Barb. We can handle this. I reached out to hold her hands. Tell me, honey. She pulled her hands away. No. He hasn't been harassing me. It's nothing like that. I was barely managing to keep my composure. I was uncertain about my next move. Should I drive to his place and give him a good beating? Or what else could I do? This isn't the moment to boast about my military background, like being a Navy SEAL or earning the Silver Star in Iraq or Afghanistan for saving 20 comrades from an RPG attack. Nothing like that. But here's the reality. Right after high school, I joined the Maryland National Guard. I used the stipend they offered to help me get through college. I didn't accomplish much. I was just a clerk typist. I completed basic training, but that was about it. However, there's a significant but. During my time in the Guard, I smoked a little. Not a lot, but some. One day, an officer who was also a doctor in civilian life grabbed my arm. By the way, I never advanced beyond E5. He held my arm and told me I had a problem. He advised me to quit smoking or face consequences, and recommended I see my family doctor. So I did. I visited our family physician. He examined me and immediately diagnosed me with cardiovascular obliterans, also known as Buerger's disease, for those unfamiliar with the term. I don't recall the exact name. He asked if I remembered feeling dizzy the first time I smoked. I confirmed. He explained that my capillaries were constricting, reducing oxygen flow. He warned that eventually they would remain closed, leading to the loss of body parts due to gangrene. He said, "Don't take my word for it. Look it up." He stood up, walked around, and placed his hand across my legs near the groin. He indicated that we might have to amputate around there. Then he said, "Ryan, you can either walk or smoke, but you can't do both." I almost lost control. He instructed me to quit smoking and do everything possible to improve and restore my circulation. I followed his advice. I began jogging, retrieved the old York barbells I had bought in 9th grade, and started lifting weights. I trained day and night. I ran every day. If anyone wanted to, they could sense the fear on my weights and clothes. Did I turn to steroids, honey, or vitamins? Absolutely not. I just worked hard, worked my ass off. Did I lose my legs? No. Did I quit smoking? Yes. Did I build muscle and become physically stronger? You bet I did. Sure, I'm not a fighter. I've never thrown a punch in anger in my life. But I was angry now, and I was built like a brick house. Maybe not with chiseled abs, but I had strong arms, biceps, shoulders, and real power. If I said I could take that bastard down, I meant it. Mess with my wife, mess with my family. God damn. I did my best to remain calm. It's okay, Barb. You can tell me. This is Ryan. You know me. Barb looked as frightened as I felt angry. She whispered again, "No, Rye," sometimes calling me Rye instead of Ryan. He didn't harass me. I needed to make her understand. I reassured her, saying, "Sweetheart, it's okay." Last Friday night, Elaine took your cell phone and connected both her laptop and mine to it using some kind of access point. We have all the messages you've sent to him since then. If necessary, we can take legal action. I'm familiar with the law and the policies in your company's handbook. Trust me, everything will be fine." She broke down, resting her head on the table. "No, Ryan," she whispered. "He didn't harass me. I was the one who pursued him." I was stunned. I had heard it, but it was hard to accept. No way. I stood up from the table, walked back and grabbed my laptop. I turned it on, navigated to the folder, opened it, and began to read. Something was terribly wrong. This couldn't be happening. There were only about 200 words, all from that day. They were deeply emotional and revealing. She was right. She had been initiating the conversations, not the other way around. He wasn't married, at least I didn't think so. I read those lines repeatedly. There they were. The messages were clear and heartbreaking. I care about you, Matt. You make me feel alive again. When can we meet again? I need to talk to you. You're so important to me. I don't know how to move forward, but I want to figure it out with you. My heart sank. My wife, my family, my entire life, all that I had worked for, all that I had ever wanted and valued, displayed on a computer screen. I felt numb. My world felt like it was crumbling. Then I heard a car pull up in front of the house. It was the kids. I closed the laptop and packed it away. With the laptop in hand, I hurried to the car. I arrived just as Derek and Elaine were getting out. I gently pushed Derek back inside, saying, "Go back to Cheryl's. Stay there until I call you." Elaine looked at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "You read them, didn't you?" I replied quietly, "Just go back to Cheryl's and wait for my call." She replied softly, "All right, Ryan." They both returned to the car but didn't drive away immediately. I called out for them to leave, but Derek only drove a short distance before stopping again. I decided to let it go for now. Turning back to the house, my emotions were overwhelming. I thought to myself, this isn't how it was supposed to be. When I reached the house, Barb was standing at the front door, her expression filled with guilt. She began, "Ryan, I walked past her, brushing by her unintentionally in my urgency, and went straight upstairs to our bedroom. Inside was the pull-down staircase to the attic, where we kept our luggage. I climbed up and brought all of it down. Barb followed me to the bedroom door, hesitating before saying, 'Ryan.' I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Instead, I went to her side of the closet and began pulling out her dresses, those expensive ones she always loved. I started packing them into the suitcases. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. 'Ryan, please, just listen to me.' I interrupted, still not meeting her gaze. 'It's done. You're leaving.' She reached out and grabbed my arm, but I gently moved her hand aside and continued packing. 'If you want to speed this up,' I said, 'you could start helping.' Barb just stood there, tears forming in her eyes. I didn't wait. I filled 2 suitcases, overnight bags, and the cosmetic cases. When those were full, I went downstairs, grabbed a box of garbage bags, and packed the rest. Surprisingly, it didn't take long. Soon, everything she owned was packed up. I started carrying her belongings out to her car. She followed, her voice shaky, pleading, "Ryan, please don't do this. I made a mistake. Just let me explain." At the door, she tried to block me, but I gently guided her aside and kept going. I loaded the last of her things into her car, amazed it all fit. Barb stood by, crying, her voice breaking as she said, "Ryan, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Please don't send me away." I paused for a moment, my anger subsiding just enough for me to respond. "You have somewhere to go. Go to Matthew." I opened the car door for her and helped her in. As she sat down, I noticed her wedding rings glinting in the fading light. I gently took her hand and slid them off. Holding the rings for a moment, I stepped back and dropped them into my pocket. "It's time to go," I said, stepping away from the car. Barb drove off slowly, her sobs audible even as she disappeared down the street. One of the neighbors, who had been quietly watching, approached me. "Ryan, is everything okay?" I sighed, trying to compose myself, and replied, "It will be." I just need some time." I turned and went back into the house. In the kitchen, I sat down, buried my head in my hands, and cried, not out of anger or adrenaline, but out of heartbreak. After a moment, I picked up my phone and called our kids. "It's okay to come home now," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The children weren't too far away. When they returned, they noticed the devastation. Derek entered and inquired, "I saw Mom leave." "Where did she go?" I replied, "To her lover." Derek remained silent and simply went upstairs. Elaine looked at me and wept, saying, "Oh, Daddy, didn't you speak to her?" Her tone reminded me of Zuzu, the little girl from the classic film It's a Wonderful Life. I thought to myself, yeah, but there are no angels here to fix this mess. The following morning, I woke the kids up. We had a brief discussion where I explained that their mother would never return to this house. I made it clear that even if I had to destroy the house, she would never come back. My children were appropriately intimidated. I told them that if their mother reached out, they could communicate with her or choose to live with her if they wanted to. I emphasized that they were both mature enough to make that choice. I also assured them that, regardless of everything, I loved them but couldn't be around their mother anymore, ever. They left for school, each driving their own vehicle. I took the rest of the week off work, knowing exactly what needed to be done, and I went further than that. Naturally, I closed our joint accounts and canceled the credit cards. I visited the bank to update all the information, canceled Barbara's car and health insurance, cut off her cell phone, scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, and hired a locksmith to change the locks. I accomplished all of that and more. I was determined to settle the score. In Maryland, there's no such thing as alienation of affection. Even if I wanted money from that man, I wouldn't receive any, and I didn't care anyway. I was screwed regardless. I contacted Barbara's employer and arranged a meeting with Human Resources. They needed to be informed because of our contract. I wouldn't label it a morals contract, but it served the same purpose. My greatest hope was that Matthew Woodland and Barbara Green would be out seeking new employment by the week's end. My attempts to sabotage their careers didn't go exactly as I had envisioned, but I came close. I approached their Human Resources department, bringing the necessary texts with me. Everything I needed. The HR head, a man, courteously informed me that they would handle Mr. Woodland's situation. However, he mentioned that my wife was spending too much time there and clearly couldn't remain in public relations. They would need to assign her to a different role. The rest of the process took much longer. I consulted a lawyer who gave me some insight into Maryland law. Pursuing a divorce would have been both painful and extremely expensive, but Maryland offered an alternative known as a separation agreement. The lawyer explained it as a limited divorce. Technically, we would still be married but living apart, with no intimacy relations allowed during the separation. If after a year we hadn't resolved our issues, the limited divorce would turn into an absolute divorce. During that year, not only would Barbara and I be prohibited from having any relationship with each other, but any involvement with others would be deemed adultery. Perfect. If she got involved with her new boyfriend, it would count as adultery. Damn, she had already done that, and now I would have my way. I would emotionally destroy her. I hated her. I hated her so much. Naturally, there were issues to address like child support, possible alimony, custody, health insurance, property matters, and most importantly, a set date. 1 year from the start, the actual divorce would take effect. I asked the lawyer if one spouse could initiate this without the other's consent. He confirmed it was possible, though a judge might require some form of counseling. I thought, counseling, forget it. However, the lawyer explained that if a judge mandated it, I would have to comply. This infuriated me, but I accepted it as the price I had to pay. I gave him the go-ahead and left his office feeling numb and devastated. Deep down, I still struggled to believe what she had done, but the evidence was undeniable. I was astonished by how much she had changed, and equally surprised by my own transformation. In less than a week, I had shifted from being a loving husband willing to die for his wife to a man obsessed with hatred and revenge. Did it matter? No. I was like Shylock, demanding my pound of flesh even if it meant destroying her worthless, unfaithful heart. Hank Williams' "Your Cheatin' Heart" had always been just a fun dance song to me. Now, well, a few weeks later, another friend from her company, an insider, informed me that they had transferred Woodland to another branch in a different state. My friend believed he would be allowed to work there until things cooled down, and then they would find a reason to let him go if he didn't resign first. He mentioned they had similar plans for Barbara. She was moved out of public relations into a department she knew little about, resulting in a pay cut. He anticipated she would be fired within a year. Yes, I was getting my revenge. Nothing else worked out. Derek became angry with both of us. He packed his things and moved in with a friend. He promised to keep me updated on his school progress, and I vowed to ensure his tuition was paid when he graduated. Elaine moved back, but it was an unhappy period. I could monitor her grades online. When I saw they were declining, her response was apathetic, just a typical, "oh, whatever." I didn't know what to do. Barbara did move in with Woodland since she had nowhere else to go. She stayed there for about a week until I was informed she had found a place for herself. I discovered where it was, a terrible place. But she had it coming. I owned the house and planned to remain there. We had accumulated significant equity over more than a decade of living in it, having refinanced twice. Unlike many, we escaped the housing market crash, and we were once proud of our financial prudence, though that pride had faded. If we couldn't reach an agreement, selling the house was likely our only option. As I surveyed the rooms, countless memories surrounded me. Memories posed another challenge. They were everywhere. Every glance brought back reminders of our former life, now a thing of the past. There were photographs, but they represented more than just images. Our family portrait from Derek's first year of middle school, our wedding photo, Elaine in her tutu, all held significance. Even the figurines beneath the plastic dome in the china cabinet were a nuisance. Still, it was the mundane things that bothered me. The scratch on the kitchen table from when Barb injured herself. The marks on the hardwood floor from dragging in the piano she insisted on having, and the scratches from moving it again after she stopped taking lessons. There was a picture of us on our 15th wedding anniversary, another of us behind the wheel as we boarded a cruise liner, and one from last year's barbecue where I was holding a beer with my arm around Barb, her smile hinting at a shared secret. We had sneaked a quick moment right under the neighbor's watchful eyes. These were the things that truly pained me. How could she? My lawyer submitted the paperwork for the separation agreement in Hagerstown, Washington County. But I forgot. It was actually Maryland. In Maryland, speedy meant slow, slow was tortoise-like, and tortoise-like meant motionless. After what felt like pointless delays, my lawyer finally filed the documents nearly 3 weeks later in October. The courts needed time to arrange their schedule, and we didn't receive a court date until November 19th, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Nothing was set in stone until we had a date. I thought to myself, they don't publish this kind of nonsense in the newspapers. So, just before Thanksgiving, we found ourselves in the Hagerstown Courthouse, an old 18th century building, with our assigned judge nowhere to be found. Instead, a substitute judge was assigned, and we didn't learn about it until we arrived. My lawyer reassured me not to worry, saying it was merely a formality. I sat at my table with my lawyer while Barbara sat with hers. Although our hearing was scheduled for the morning, The process was slow and tedious, causing us to wait until late afternoon. Facing us was a judge who seemed older than Methuselah himself, taking an eternity to review the documents. Barbara looked stunning. I felt exhausted and worn out, but she appeared as if she had just returned from a vacation. Her hair was impeccable, her makeup flawless, and her dress fit her perfectly. She looked vibrant, healthy, and youthful. I figured that being with a man only 6 years older than her son must be somewhat healing for her. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, "This is Judge Landis. Things might get a bit complicated. They say his granddaughter's ex-husband was quite harsh during their divorce." Just what I needed, I thought, a judge driven by righteous anger. The judge moved painstakingly slowly through the paperwork. The clerk, a very young woman, had to stand beside him as he meticulously turned each of the 8 pages. Finally, he looked up over his glasses and spoke in a barely understandable mumble. He glanced at me and said, "You'll get your year. It starts today." Then turned to the clerk and asked, "What day is it?" The clerk gave a gentle smile and replied, "The 19th. The elderly man smiled at the clerk. I watched as he gently patted her hand and said, "Thanks, honey." He glanced back at me with a frown, then turned to Barbara with a smile and remarked, "I see you have 2 children, a 16-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy. They're mature enough to understand. I expect to see them shortly after Thursday, perhaps Friday morning, at this address." He scribbled the address on a couple of scraps of paper and added, "I also expect both of you to be there." My lawyer stood up and protested, "But Your Honor." The judge reached for his gavel, accidentally knocking off his glasses in the process. He gave the wooden gavel a light tap and said, "This is my courtroom, son. You won't interrupt." My lawyer sheepishly sat back down. Next, my soon-to-be ex-wife's lawyer stood up. The judge looked up. "Yes?" Barbara's lawyer politely, not obsequiously, stated, "Your Honor, my client respectfully requests that counseling be arranged." The judge smiled at my wife, then looked at me with a scowl before returning his smile to Barbara. "I see this separation request wasn't initiated by you," he said, turning back to me with an unfriendly tone. "There will be counseling." My lawyer stood once more, "With the court's permission." The judge looked down his nose at my attorney. "Yes?" "With the court's indulgence," my lawyer continued, "we'd like to participate in selecting the counselor." Almost ignoring him, the judge replied, "I'll choose the counselor," then addressed me. "Whoever it is, they will treat both spouses fairly." I shrugged. I heard the whistle and felt a chill run down my spine. The judge then concluded the session. "I will meet both children at the specified location on Friday morning. I expect both parents to attend. No lawyers need to be present. In the meantime, I will review this couple's resources and make a decision. Is there anything else?" My lawyer responded, "No, Your Honor." Barbara's lawyer agreed, and that was the end of it. Until Friday. As we exited the courtroom, Barbara approached me and asked, "Should I bring the kids, or would you prefer to?" I was uncertain. Had she already reached them? I replied, "Well, Derek's staying with—" She interrupted, "He's with me right now." Damn, I thought he was staying with a friend. Now I find out my son is with the unfaithful woman. Betrayal. I began to say something about Elaine. "Well, Barbara cut me off. "I know Elaine's with you. Tell her I said hello and that I love her." I thought, this is really messed up. I responded, "Then it's Friday morning at this." I saw the address. It was a private home on the outskirts of Hagerstown. Address. I didn't realize it at the time, but we would be going to the judge's private residence, and my kids, at least my son, had essentially betrayed me. We all gathered at the judge's residence. It seemed he was capable of handling it, and for reasons I couldn't grasp, we appeared to have become his project. Barbara and I were seated outside in what I would describe as a small parlor. The room contained only two old, ornate chairs reminiscent of Queen Anne style, a larger love seat, and an antique roll-top desk with a swivel chair in front. The two of us were uncomfortable. I was tired and uneasy on the love seat, while Barbara relaxed in one of the chairs, engrossed in a novel. She looked stunning. We remained there for nearly 2 hours without any water. No opportunity for a bathroom break. Nothing. The children retreated to a nearby closed-off room and stayed with the judge. I could faintly hear their conversations and occasional laughter, though I couldn't comprehend what they were discussing. Just before noon, the judge and my children emerged. Derek shook the judge's hand and kissed his mother, but merely nodded to me. Elaine kissed the judge on the cheek and expressed her thanks, though I didn't understand why. She then kissed her mother and, standing aside, courteously told me she would wait for me. I thought to myself, well, thanks for nothing. The judge smiled at Barbara and said, I'd like to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m., if that works for you. Barbara returned a sweet smile and agreed, effortlessly charming. He turned his attention to me. I'd like to see you now. Can you do that? With no other option, I agreed. He led me back to the room where he and my children had been. We both took seats in one of the old chairs. He offered me a glass of water, which I accepted, and then he began to speak. Mr. Green, I've reviewed your lawyer's documents and spoken with your children. Your wife's actions have, understandably, been almost unforgivable. Having an affair with another man, especially a much younger one, is a harsh betrayal of your trust. It states here that you've been married for quite some time, 18 years in fact. You met in college, and you've expressed how deeply you loved her. I realize what she did must be incredibly painful for you. I began to respond. For the first time, I felt he empathized with me. Your Honor, I'd like... He raised his hand. Let's save the Your Honor for the courtroom. Here, you can call me Alan. I wanted to continue, so I started speaking again, but he interrupted me once more. No, it's my turn. You'll have your chance shortly, okay? I replied, Yes, sir. Alan. He smiled, genuinely this time. Would you like a glass of brandy? I declined, saying, No, I'm fine. All right, he responded. Let's go over what happened. First, your wife broke her vows. She left home and had an affair with a much younger man. I sent my secretary out this past Tuesday and obtained some photos. I'd say he's quite attractive. A real heartthrob, as my secretary described him. Yes, he certainly turns heads. My stomach churned. The judge continued, You clearly loved her deeply, or at least you did. Her betrayal is one of the worst things that can happen to a happily married man, and you were very happy together. I replied weakly, Yes, I was. But then what transpired? You discovered her actions and reacted, or rather, you overreacted. I began to speak, but he stopped me again. I have it here, Mr. Green. Ryan, you literally threw her out of your house. Your children were present. You remember, don't you? You pushed her aside. They witnessed it and said you knocked her down. Mr. Green, that's not how grown men, especially those with children, behave towards someone they loved. You were quite ruthless that night, weren't you? I responded as best I could. Judge, I mean Alan. You don't understand. I trusted her. I thought he, that man, the hunk, was harassing her. I discovered she was the one harassing him. She chased him. She was my wife. I read her texts. She wanted to leave me and be with him. Your Honor, Alan, this just isn't fair. I gave her... He interrupted. Ryan, I understand. I've reviewed your comments. Your descriptions have been, how can I put it, quite vivid. You mentioned that your emotions were all over the place. Your son mentioned that he thought you threatened a neighbor, an old friend. Ryan, do you realize you could have been arrested? I slumped. All right, I might have gone a bit overboard, but wouldn't you? He leaned back. I'm not sure, Ryan. Honestly, I'm not certain. However, I do know that your wife deserves something in this situation. Have you allowed her to share her side of the story yet? Has she ever spoken up either that night or since then? I felt overwhelmed and devastated. No, I thought. Ryan, 18 years, 2 children, 20 years of commitment, and not even a word. I felt trapped. No, I guess. I mean, yes, I suppose. He smiled. So you'll let her tell her story. I don't think it will change much, but who knows? At the very least, you might find some closure. I began to think. My father. I'm speaking with my father. I replied, I suppose it can't hurt. I added, it won't alter anything. The elderly judge clasped his hands together. All right, let's examine the financial aspects. Uh-oh, I thought. This is where things get really tough. Yes, I responded. He reviewed some documents in his lap. Your wife's income was comparable to yours until her position shift. And yes, we understand why she lost her supervisory role. The reason isn't important, but she earns significantly less now. I've seen her new living situation. It's quite different from the home you both were in the process of buying. You still reside there, correct? Yes, sir, I do, I answered. My mind raced. I was going to lose my house. This will affect my job. I'll be humiliated. The judge began to address me. Not to punish you, but if your wife remains where she is, she'll require your assistance. It will be your duty to arrange something for her. I notice you've removed her from your health insurance. Her premiums are higher, and the coverage is reduced. There are other costs as well. You excluded her from your car insurance. Companies will discover this. They'll attempt to place her on an assigned risk policy. You've also taken her off your credit cards. You might have damaged her credit score. Credit card companies could cause her significant trouble. Do you see the consequences of your actions? Ryan, she's still legally your wife. She's the mother of your children. You've taken steps here. You've acted hastily in ways that will harm you, her, and your children. He continued. Son, I know you're in pain. People at your workplace will gossip. You'll be labeled a cuckold. The violence from the night you ousted her will resurface, too. You could be seen as an abseer. If she hires a lawyer, I know him, he'll be relentless. He persisted. Consider her as well. You loved her once, for 20 years you did. She's been demoted. She's a beautiful woman. You know how women are. She'll face humiliation every day she goes out. They'll call her derogatory names like a girl of easy virtue or Jezebel. What about your children? Her shame and infidelity will affect them. But so will your revenge. Every value you've both tried to instill will be questioned. They're suffering, Ryan, and you're both responsible. Now, regarding the finances, I'm afraid you'll need to contribute some of it, perhaps until the year is over. I asked, How much? He handed me a document with some numbers on it. I looked at the paperwork in shock. I can't handle this. I'll need to sell the house. It's the only home Elaine has ever known. I don't think Derek remembers. No, sir, I can't do this. He took back the documents and said, There's another option. Desperate, I asked. What is it? You have an extra room in your house. Elaine calls it a small office. I began to shake my head in refusal. He continued, Elaine has offered to give up her room for your estranged wife. You both could remain officially separated as long as you agree to avoid any intimate contact. I kept shaking my head back and forth. He went on, I could order that you be moved out until Elaine turns 18. Ryan, as the mother, always gets first priority when it comes to the children. I won't impose that on you. Barbara wouldn't need to stay with you for the entire year, just long enough to get her finances in order. That might take a few months, or maybe just a few weeks. I felt the impending threat. I don't. Mr. Green, these are your children, your future. You can't tell me you can't be at least civil to your wife for a few weeks. We'll undergo counseling. Who knows? I'm not suggesting reconciliation, but you and your estranged wife will be around each other for the rest of your lives. Don't you think your children deserve something from this? I placed my hands on my knees. I need to use the bathroom. Judge Landis pointed to a nearby door. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, looking into the mirror. How could she look so good while I looked so bad? Why was I making all the sacrifices when she was the one who ruined everything? It's not my fault. It's not fair. But I knew I was defeated. I returned to where Judge Landis was waiting. I'm not promising anything, but I guess if she stayed out of the way. He neither smiled nor frowned. I'll talk with Barbara. Maybe then the three of us can meet again. He stood up and extended his hand. Ryan, these things happen. You'd be surprised how sometimes they work out. I'm not suggesting returning to something that's clearly been irretrievably lost. But some kind of harmony isn't entirely out of the question. One day your children might marry. There could be grandchildren. Someday you and Barbara will have to at least pretend. You might even become friends again. I wanted to cry, just cry, but I knew he was right. Except about being friends. I was uncertain about the direction things were taking. I hoped Barbara would decline to move back, but I wanted to keep the house. Even if it meant holding on to it for just a few more years, enough time for Elaine to finish high school and go to college, I needed that home. The outlook seemed bleak, especially since Elaine's grades had already plummeted. Late Thursday, a week after Thanksgiving, I received a call from Judge Landis's office. Barbara wanted to move back, but would take the small office room, allowing Elaine to keep her own room. We scheduled her move for that Sunday. Sunday arrived. I hired movers, and within 4 hours, Barbara was back to where everything began. The kids were ecstatic. Barbara appeared cautious. As for me, I was miserable. I left the house and stayed away all day, eating out and not returning until bedtime. While I was out, Barbara and Elaine thoroughly cleaned the entire house. Derek took Barbara's car and washed it. He visited the station we usually used, which was closed, but he told me he left a note asking them to check it out. Derek mentioned that the car, an old Chevy Cavalier, was in rather poor condition. Elaine and Derek arranged to share their school driving duties so their mother could use one of their cars for work. Our new living arrangements brought unexpected changes. Aside from Barbara's small room, I still had unrestricted access to the house, but everything else had shifted. Since Barbara kept all her clothes, Derek gave up his closet space and moved his belongings downstairs. We had a basic cellar bathroom with a toilet, small sink, and shower, where Derek began doing all his cleaning. The old office lacked bathing facilities, but Elaine's room had a full bathroom, which Barbara and Elaine shared. I still had the master bedroom with our old king-sized bed, a full bathroom with a shower and jacuzzi, and a large double closet. Before the separation, Barbara's clothes occupied most of the closet space. I offered to share it, but no one accepted, leaving me with a vast, mostly empty closet while other areas were cluttered. Downstairs was arranged so I could use the living room, dining room, kitchen, and laundry room whenever I wanted. Barbara and the kids said they would only use the kitchen when I was at work or asleep, and if I needed it, they would leave immediately. I could access the living room and TV at any time. Since Elaine had her own TV, they decided to watch everything there. I could enter if necessary, but they would otherwise stay out of my way. I felt like I had almost the entire house to myself. During that first week, whenever I entered a room, they would simply disappear. Barbara would literally move aside to let me pass. Sometimes it seemed like she was avoiding me. Once, when I went to the kitchen to get a soda, I heard her and saw her standing in the back of our walk-in pantry. I approached the door and asked, "Why are you hiding here?" She quickly moved out, saying sheepishly, "I'm sorry." Damn it. She acted as though she was scared of me. Sure, I hated her. I hated what she had done. She had broken my heart and ruined everything, but I would never have hit her. I think it was intentional. Barbara was playing the martyr. It just wasn't right. By the end of the first week, I was miserable. I owned the house but felt like an outsider. Wherever I went, they would leave, and if I was somewhere, they would keep their distance. I remembered a movie where a man died and became a ghost. He saw everyone and tried to talk to them, but they acted as if he wasn't there. That's how I felt. If things didn't improve, I knew I would leave. I didn't want to, as I had just as much right to be in my own home as anyone else, but they were intentionally excluding me. As time went by, I increasingly felt disconnected. It didn't seem right or just. I was the father, fulfilling every role expected of me. I was the main provider, established the rules, while Barbara served as the friend. I taught them how to ride bikes, ice skate, and drive. In the winter, I was the one who shoveled the walkway. Barbara's only contributions were baking brownies and making cocoa. I recall the cocoa and brownies because of a particular event. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find them sitting at the table with brownies and some cocoa that Barb had just prepared. Before I entered, I heard their laughter and conversation, much like before. When I came in, they stood up and left. Elaine wrapped the brownies and placed them in the refrigerator. The three of them quietly took their cups of cocoa and went upstairs. They left without saying a word, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. Neither Elaine nor Derek offered. Now that we were estranged, living apart but still under the same roof, I felt as though I had to seek approval from those who should have been seeking it from me. My children began to avoid and ignore me, and it was painful. The long-awaited day finally arrived. Barb, the judge, and I had already met twice, with 3 more meetings scheduled. Barbara continuously apologized during the sessions, expressing regret for her actions and insisting she wouldn't have acted that way if given another chance. I grew weary of her constant remorse. I felt the same weight of regret. Her emotions were raw, and her tears seemed to sway both the judge and me. I was constantly urged to be patient, which became exhausting. Although the sessions were supposed to be private, I knew someone was discussing them outside the room. My children had taken sides, and I suspected Barbara was sharing her perspective. I chose not to engage in that. Even worse, my 2 sisters sided with Barbara. They misunderstood the full picture of what had happened. I felt cornered and betrayed. I understood the judge's aim for reconciliation, but to me it seemed like an impossible goal, distant and unattainable. Despite my reservations, I was convinced to give reconciliation a chance. Deep down, I was seeking answers. Why had Barbara been unfaithful? Had I failed her in some way? Was I neglectful, inattentive, or lacking as a partner? I couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to make such a choice. These thoughts consumed me, leaving me restless and uncertain. At times, it felt like the judge was subtly siding with Barbara. Everything seemed orchestrated, and I struggled to find purpose in the counseling sessions. At home, I felt isolated, and at work, I faced awkward glances and whispered conversations. In my free time, I began searching for an apartment, questioning whether staying was worth it. Then, during our 3rd session, everything changed. I reached my breaking point and demanded the truth. "Enough with the excuses, Barb," I said. "Tell me the truth. Why him? What was the reason?" I was stunned when she decided to open up. The judge intervened, cautioning, "Barbara, don't go into this. Ryan isn't ready." But Barbara insisted, saying, "I can't keep it inside anymore. He needs to know." And then she began. "Ryan," she said, "things with him were different. He was spontaneous, and at that moment in my life I got caught up in something that felt exciting and new. He made me feel noticed in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. She continued, "I loved you, Ryan, but things had become predictable. You're so dependable and steady, and I admired that. But I felt like I was losing a part of myself. I don't know why I made those choices, but I see now how much they hurt you." Her words stung, but they were an honest reflection of how we'd drifted apart. She admitted that she had been seeking something fleeting, something she now deeply regretted. Despite her explanations, the damage was done, and I wasn't sure if I could move past it. Then she delivered the final emotional blow. Her words cut deep, dismantling everything I thought I knew. "Ryan," she said, "you were so easy to fool. You trusted me completely, never doubting anything I said. Even when you saw the messages, you believed it was Matt pursuing me, not the other way around. The idea that I could betray you was unimaginable to you. You always saw the best in me, which made it easy to deceive you. I created stories, I lied, and you never questioned it. Not even once." Her voice remained steady, but her words left me shattered. "And when the truth came out, when you realized I was the one chasing Matt, everything changed. You changed. I thought you'd approach it logically like you always did, analyzing the situation, solving the problem step by step. But I was wrong. You didn't act the way I expected. You became someone I didn't recognize. Suddenly, you were unpredictable, and that scared me. I didn't know how to handle it anymore. I felt crushed, as though every ounce of strength had been stripped away. Her accusations left me speechless, but I finally managed to respond. "You couldn't trust me? You thought I would approach your betrayal like solving a math problem? Was that all I meant to you? A machine? Something predictable?" It hit me then. She never truly knew me. At that moment, the judge interrupted. "Barb, I've let you speak your mind, but it's time to stop. Ryan, I'm sorry you had to hear all this." Barbara turned to the judge and said, "I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted Ryan to understand how dependable he's been, how much I relied on him through everything." The judge nodded, but remained firm. "Barbara, for 20 years Ryan has been by your side, giving everything out of love. The gestures, flowers, gifts, they weren't obligations. They were expressions of his devotion. In all our sessions, there's one thing I've never heard you say, Barb. Not once have you told your husband that you love him. Why is that?" Barb hesitated before replying, "But I do love him. I love everything about him." The judge sighed, his professional demeanor softening. "Barbara, do you really? Have you ever truly loved him?" That was the breaking point for me. I stood up, barely able to contain my emotions. "Judge, I've heard enough. I'll attend the final sessions, but after that, I'm done." Barbara began to cry, but I needed to say what had been weighing on me. "Barb, do you even remember who I used to be?" She looked at me, her expression a mix of confusion and regret. "I wanted to be a cowboy when I was younger. My favorite song was Poncho and Lefty. Later it was Should Have Been a Cowboy. I even learned to play guitar. I think it's still in the attic somewhere. Do you even remember that? I don't think you do." I wasn't saying it for her anymore. I was saying it for myself. "Barbara, I had dreams once. I wanted to explore the world, but I chose the practical path. I joined the National Guard, got my degree in accounting, got married, and built a life. I did everything I was supposed to do, everything people expected. And yet, here we are." Barbara sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands, but I had to finish. "Look at me. I became the dependable, stable person everyone wanted me to be. And what did you do? You chose to destroy that trust." She had come to a halt, sniffing, though I wasn't certain she was listening. I shared my unspoken feelings, saying, "I'm sorry, Barb. I'm sorry I wasn't enough for you. But honestly, when I reflect on it, I realize I wasn't enough for myself either. I had truly ceased communicating with Barb. This was for my own sake. I'll be 40 soon. The first 20 years were spent growing up. The past 20, I followed everything everyone expected of me. I guess that included the flowers, the candy, and the just-in-bed intimacy. That chapter is closed. I'm not 40 yet, and I've missed so much. I'm sorry you discovered I wasn't enough, but you're right." She was struggling to breathe. Through her tears, she began, "Ryan, I didn't let her continue. This was no longer about her. No, Barbara. Once this is over and our year together concludes, I'm starting anew. I'll leave the company. My children don't need me, and neither do you. You deserve to be wild and free. I'm sorry I can't say where I'm headed or what I'll be doing, but it definitely won't be here anymore." I turned to Judge Landis and said, "Judge, I'd like to handle the last 2 sessions. I'll stay until next November, and then I'm leaving." I concluded, "Barb, I love you. I always will. There's nothing not to love about you. You're perfect. But I no longer want perfection. I'm uncertain about what I want, but I do know I crave something different. Who knows what the future holds? I'm keeping all my options open. I'm telling you now that after next November, if I never see you, Derek, or Elaine again, it will be okay because I know I did my best. This train's next stop is for me. I owe this to you, and I'll love you forever for it." She was crying like a child. I stood up and said, "Judge, I'm leaving now," and walked away. I couldn't make it through November. I completed the final sessions, and around Easter, I visited the judge. We reached an agreement. I closed my retirement account and resigned from my job. The judge allowed me to withdraw from one of our smaller cash deposits, and then I left. I never informed Barb or the kids. I simply packed a suitcase, called a cab, and disappeared. Regarding my wedding ring, I was supposed to open the pool at the end of May as part of my duties. On the last morning, I went out to the backyard, lifted the pool liner, and let it fall into the water. Maybe they'd find it, maybe not. Honestly, I thought that since I wouldn't be there to open the pool, they might not even bother with it. When I threw Barb's ring, I aimed for a neighbor's yard. Then I remembered how high he mowed his grass. I figured by June her rings would be deeply buried in the dirt. How fitting. Where was I supposed to go? I was too old to be a cowboy. However, I always enjoyed fishing and swimming, and although my fingers weren't as nimble, I could still play the guitar, even if just a little. Where would someone like me go? I headed to Key West, Florida, the last place anyone would expect to find someone like me. I started growing my hair out and developed a big mustache. No short beard, though, since I remembered my dad talking about Woody Hayes and the high-speed blowjobs. I got a job at a bar. At first they made me work for free, but I proved to be reliable and they began paying me. I played the guitar at night, which wasn't great, but most patrons were too drunk or too high to notice. I owned 3 pairs of pants, brown jeans, blue jeans, and tan jeans. Okay, I also had some cutoffs. I wore flip-flops and tennis shoes. I vowed never to wear a button-up shirt, a sport coat, or a tie again. I stuck with ragged t-shirts and loved it. Every now and then, I thought about the kids and Barb. I would miss them too, but a few drinks would make those thoughts disappear. I discovered there were other women. For an older guy, I became quite popular. I made new friends, including some gay friends. Some of my prettiest girlfriends weren't anatomically female. I didn't engage in any of the you-know activities, though. But they accepted me, and I felt good. I tried scuba diving and went fishing. I helped out around some piers, and some boat owners let me assist occasionally. I was good with numbers and helped some of them during tax season. I was moving forward with my life. It was yet another Monday when my life became perplexing, once more, I had been exchanging emails with my sisters. I never used Skype, nor did I inform them of my location. At least I didn't believe I had. I thought I was remaining anonymous. Occasionally they would share updates without me asking. I discovered, as my lawyer and friends mentioned, that Barb's company found a reason to let her go after about a year. The kids were somewhat inconsistent with school attendance, but that was their responsibility. Then the foolish thing happened. It seems someone uncovered something. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the bar, a woman approached me. Brown hair, blue eyes, and dazzling white teeth. She asked, "Buy a girl a drink?" It was Barb. Somehow she had tracked me down. She told me she had hired a private investigator. I didn't believe her, but didn't confront her about it either. By that time, I had made a down payment on an affordable cottage. Barb began to follow me around and discovered where I lived. She continued to hang around the bar. With some of the regulars, well, she was attractive. And then with me. After a while, the other men stopped flirting with her. Barb kept appearing at the places I frequented at night. I often played chess at a tavern in the late afternoons. She was always nearby, touching and kissing me. She resembled the girl I had met years earlier, only now she was even more beautiful and attentive. I understood what she was doing and allowed it. I'm not entirely sure why, but deep down I was happy about it. I stayed composed. We weren't married, and I intended to keep it that way. She moved in, and we began living together again. A funny incident occurred one night. We went out, and I became a bit tipsy. When we got home, I tried to pick her up to throw her onto the bed like that boy had done. She broke down crying, saying she wanted me, not that. So I set her down, and we ended up making love in our own old-fashioned way. What can I say? I had always loved her. I discovered she wanted something different, too. She stopped wearing makeup and pursued a dream she had. She took up pottery. I have to admit she had no talent whatsoever, not even a little. Still, she kept trying. She met a kind lady who owned a gift shop, and Barb convinced her to consign her junk there. Naturally, nobody bought her crap. Well, you know me. Some people never change. Barb kept going back to the shop owner asking, "Did anyone purchase anything?" So what did I do? I started earning extra money through tips. No one knew how much. I began convincing tourists to buy her worthless items. She had a pot priced at $19.95, and I would persuade a tourist to purchase it by offering the pot's cost, plus an additional $20 after the sale. Barb would come home excitedly saying, "Look, Rye. Someone bought one of my pieces." I would respond, "That's great, Barb." I knew it would happen. Now I regularly buy her items. I take them, put them in a bag, and dispose of them. I don't think she'll ever find out. It just goes to show that some people never truly change. Hard to believe. I'm still taking care of her, and God, I am so damn happy. The end, I suppose.